Hello Internet and welcome to this week's edition of 1 Minute Answers from 1 Minute Economics, an edition in which I'll be answering 8 questions about the European Union. But before doing that, I'm going to, as usual, pick the topic for next week, and the topic for next week is going to be central banking. So if you have a question about how central banks work, what their role is, what they've done right, what I think they've done wrong, and so on, simply ask me a question by writing a comment below, and I will do my best to answer next week. For today's first question, Max would like to know how you adjust the value of real estate for inflation, and he's asking this because he wants to do it for his country and he's experiencing difficulties. Now, as someone who doesn't live in the United States, let me just say that I feel your pain, because if you live in the US, then all you have to do is perform a few simple Google searches and you're going to come across tons and tons and tons of pretty pictures, charts, information, anything at all that your heart desires is at your fingertips. If, however, you live in a, let's say, less popular country, then all of a sudden you're going to realize that there isn't as much already processed information that you can simply use, and as such, you're going to have to do the legwork yourself in a lot of cases. Now, fortunately, however, adjusting the value of real estate, or anything else for that matter, for inflation isn't all that complicated, and all you have to do is follow 2 simple steps. Number 1, find inflation-related information for your country. Now, this is easy to do because there are several databases that make this information available free of charge. So if you want to find out what the rate of inflation was in your country back in 1980 or 1985 or whatever, you can do that pretty easily no matter where you live. Number 2, using this information, try to determine how much a unit of currency in the year in which you want to start would be able to buy today. So to give you an example for the United States, of course, let's assume that in 1980, a home used to cost $100,000. If you want to adjust by the rate of inflation, then all you have to do essentially is answer a simple question. How much would a $1980 be able to buy today? And fortunately, again, this is pretty easy to do. So all in all, it's kind of inconvenient not to live in the United States and not to have that much information at your disposal. It's indeed annoying that you have to do the legwork yourself, but there is a silver lining, the fact that it's not that complicated. The second question for today has been asked by our friend Manuja, who wants to know what I think the biggest flaw was in the creation of the Eurozone. Now, this is a great question because I think the biggest flaw in the creation of the Eurozone was the creation of the Eurozone, in that Europe basically wanted to make a choice without really making the choice. What I'm trying to say is that logically and realistically speaking, Europe has 2 main options. 1, move towards far, far greater integration, or in other words, moving towards the United States of Europe, kind of like our friends in the US have the United States of America. So that would be one option. And the second option would be, in my opinion, abandoning the common currency. Because as it is, making everyone use the same currency, in light of the fact that there is not enough cohesion, there's not enough, predictability when it comes to various fiscal policies and so on, this hasn't really been tried historically speaking, and I would venture to say it's quite possible it has never been tried because it's just not a really good idea. Now, of course, we need to understand that moving towards the United States of Europe is a huge political decision, and to a certain extent, the politicians who have chosen this path need to be understood. At the same time, though, economics is economics, and if you do something that doesn't make all that much economic sense, you shouldn't be surprised when the market ultimately proves to you that what you've done was a pretty bad idea. Today's third question is basically a follow-up to question number 2, and Manuja would like to know if it's the best idea in the world for Eurozone nations to have the same monetary policy, but in some cases completely different fiscal policies. And once again, I'm going to have to say that the answer is unfortunately no. Because, for example, a monetary policy that's a great fit for a, let's call it, fiscally prudent country such as Germany might not be the best choice in the world for a nation that just elected a populist party that promised everyone free stuff during the elections. And of course, some of these promises are going to be transformed into fiscal policy. So when in terms of fiscal policy, you have a country here, one in the middle, and so on, and then you slap everyone with the same currency, you shouldn't be surprised that the results are going to be all over the place. So for this entire thing to work, you definitely need far better cohesion. And I've said it this week on the news video, the one about the European army, that I'm a firm believer in the fact that moving towards the United States of Europe is the best approach for the European Union. But for this to happen, countries need to no longer be all over the place in terms of fiscal policy. Now, I'm not saying that the entire new construction should be robot-like, so 100% homogeneous. No, by all means, countries can keep their national identity. They should do that. But in terms of fiscal policy, in terms of things like that, there needs to be stability. There needs to be predictability, because otherwise, we're just going to keep saying things that sound good, but the construction itself is just not going to work. It won't pass the test of history, it won't pass the test of economics, and perhaps most importantly, it won't pass the test of simple logic. Manuja's third and final question, and our fourth question for today, revolves around the Brexit, and specifically I'm asked if now that the United Kingdom is leaving, this opens a door of opportunity for further EU expansion, or if the growth phase of the European Union is over. Now, this is a great question, and it's important to know that EU leaders in general are trying to treat this Brexit situation as an opportunity. In other words, by saying something like, yeah, the United Kingdom was never truly committed to the European project, so in a way, it's better that they're leaving. For example, back in the early days, you had Charles de Gaulle over in France, who had his doubts, to say the least, about letting the UK in for this precise reason. And all in all, I think it's fair for EU leaders to see things from this perspective. But okay, the temptation of letting more countries in, of allowing the EU to grow further is definitely there. But at the same time, we do have examples in recent memory that sting. Like, for example, the fact that perhaps Greece was allowed to use the euro far too soon. Or some countries are saying that, allowing this or that nation to be a part of the EU was not a good idea, and so on and so forth. So essentially, you have to reconcile the desire within the European Union for the European project to continue growing, a desire which is definitely there, but you have to reconcile it with the skepticism, especially among the richer nations, when it comes to letting new countries in. So is the growth phase of the European Union over? No. I don't think it is, and I think the European Union is still open to the idea of letting new countries in. But at the same time, due to situations such as, what happened in Greece, I do believe that prudence is going to be the operative word, and that the European Union is going to be quite strict when it comes to deciding who they let in. Question number 5 has been asked by Mr. Map, who would like to know how democratic the European Union is. And As much as I like the idea of having the United States of Europe, I do have to say that a lot of things about the European Union right now are not exactly democratic. And I do think that this needs to be fixed for a project such as the United States of Europe to work. Because on the one hand, of course, you have the European Parliament, and in each country there are elections, and the people get to choose who represents them in the European Parliament. But at the same time, the EU Parliament doesn't have as much power as you think it has. And for example, the right to suggest new policies and things like that is granted to entities that are not elected. And perhaps the number one thing that makes people raise an eyebrow when it comes to the European project in general is precisely this lack of democracy. The fact that, in their opinion, you have these bureaucrats whom nobody elected and who have all of this power, and you do have to ask yourself, where's the democracy in that? So, to answer your question, okay, the European Union is not undemocratic, but it definitely has elements that are not exactly compatible with a intellectually honest form of democracy. And again, as much as I love the idea of having the United States of Europe, I do think that this issue needs to be addressed, and ultimately, whatever the construction of the United States of Europe will look like if we ever get there, I do believe it needs to be handled within a democratic framework. The second question asked by Mr. Mapp was to which extent the EU is controlled by Germany. And I would say that, it would be hypocritical on my part to say that no, the European Union is not at all controlled by Germany. That obviously wouldn't be true. And in fact, I think it's important to make, the distinction between at least two broad types of EU countries. On the one hand, you have countries that reach for their wallets, or countries that mostly fund the European projects, and on the other hand, you have countries that are on the receiving end. So simply put, countries that pay more than they receive, and countries that receive more than they pay. Now, you might ask yourself, why are these countries willing to pay more than they receive? Well, they're doing this because they believe in the European project, and because there are all sorts of other advantages to the European Union, but all in all, it mostly revolves around the idea that, okay, we're doing this, but still the European project as a whole is gonna be something that enables all of us to ultimately be better off. But at the same time, those who put the money on the table naturally want to have a thing or two to say about the way in which that money is spent. And this does translate into a form of control. So again, it would be hypocritical to say that, okay, Germany in particular, but the other, let's say, creditor nations of the European Union in general, it would be hypocritical to say that no, they don't want any kind of a special control over the European Union. Of course they do. They're the ones who are bringing money from home, so to speak. So naturally, they want a say in what happens with that money. Now, of course, the poorer countries, or if you will, the countries that are on the receiving end of the European Union, aren't that thrilled with the state of affairs, but again, you do have to accept the fact that the European Union is never going to be a perfect project. And as long as you have countries that pay more, and as long as you have countries that, ultimately support the entire thing financially, you're going to have countries that are going to want a higher degree of control than the ones that are on the receiving end. The seventh question has been asked by Gandalf, who would like to know if and to what degree politics can undermine the geo-economic collaboration between European Union states. And I firmly believe that, yes, politics can most definitely undermine economic collaboration, and all we have to do is take a look at the relatively recent history, and more specifically at the Brexit situation. Now, the entire Brexit thing is still a work in progress, so it remains to be seen what will ultimately happen, but let's just take a moment and envision a scenario in which the two parties don't reach an agreement. And I, for one, am downright terrified at what would happen if, for one reason or another, we would be in a situation in which, one, the European Union would have an incentive, a political incentive, to see the UK fail, so that they can say, look, this is what happens when countries leave the European Union, look at how bad the United Kingdom is doing, don't follow their example. And two, obviously, on the opposite end of the spectrum, the United Kingdom has every political incentive to say, hey, look at how bad the European Union is doing, and look at us, it was such a good decision to leave. So I, for one, am terrified at the political and, of course, economic implications of such a scenario, which is why I hope that some kind of an agreement will ultimately be reached, because it may very well happen, and this is just one example, of course, it can happen between other countries as well. It may very well happen that even if the economics of a certain situation indicate that working together, finding common grounds, and so on is in the best interest of all parties involved, the participants might decide to do the exact opposite for political reasons. And I don't know about other economists, but the politics of it all do tend to frighten me quite a bit. For today's final question, Gandalf would like me to make a bit of an analogy between the European Union and Arab nations and try to figure out if Arab nations would have flourished in the absence of all of the political problems that have been plaguing that region. And yes, I believe that is the case because come on, Arab nations, we all know, have quite impressive riches, but at the same time, it's hard for me to make a comparison between them and the European Union for the simple reason that while they are resource rich and while they have quite a few things going for them, they are missing out in one important department, perhaps the most important department for a country, and that is political stability. When you don't have political stability, then it's hard for me as an economist to navigate in those seas. It's ridiculously hard for anything meaningful to materialize long term because you have regime changes, you have all sorts of secret services that are influencing one country and another and protest movements, and then one thing leads to another, and then we had that regime change, now we're going to have another one, and this of course leads to different policies, to different geopolitical relationships, and to all sorts of things which make a mess out of everything. So unfortunately, I would say that Arab nations are missing out when it comes to the number one aspect that makes or breaks a region, political stability. So would things have been a lot better had this political stability existed? I would say that yes, most definitely. But unfortunately, given the fact that things are so crazy over there right now, no matter how much research I do, I find it very hard to think of a scenario in which these things could sort themselves out. I do hope it happens, maybe if there's a worldwide consensus and if, we all work towards some kind of a solution being achieved, then political stability can become a real thing over there, but it's going to be very, very, very hard. That's it for today, guys. Thanks a lot for tuning in to yet another edition of 1 Minute Answers from 1 Minute Economics. And remember, the topic for next week is central banking. So if you want to know how a central bank works, if you have concerns about specific central banking policies, or if you want to ask me anything else central banking related, then simply write a comment below and I'm going to do my best to answer your question next week. As always, please like my videos, comment, be active in the community, and subscribe to 1 Minute Economics if you haven't by now. Also, if possible, please take a minute, literally, out of your time every now and then to tell people about the 1 Minute Economics channel on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and so on, because even a quick and simple message makes a huge difference. And of course, those who want to support the channel financially as well by buying my book, by donating through PayPal, Bitcoin, Patreon, and so on, can head on over to 1minuteeconomics.com where they can find more info on how to do that. Thanks a lot, guys, and have an awesome weekend.